So today we have Sarah Brundrett. She is currently the Manager of Library Services at the University of South Australia. Today she is going to be talking about how open scholarship is the ability to use, reuse, and build upon the knowledge that is shared. In her talk, Openness in Academic Institutions, a Beginner's Guide. Round of applause, please.
And I haven't said anything yet. Good morning, and thank you for the introduction. My name is Sarah Brundrett, and I'm an academic librarian with experience in 2 countries across 3 universities and multiple roles in both technical and frontline service teams. That doesn't mean I'm technical. Today I will be talking generally about openness and academic institutions. I would like to acknowledge that we are meeting on the traditional country of the Kaurna people of the Adelaide Plains and pay respect to elders past and present. I recognise and respect their cultural heritage, beliefs and relationship with the land. I acknowledge that they are of continuing importance to the Kaurna people today. And I also extend that respect to other Aboriginal language groups and First Nations. So, open scholarship is something I know pretty well, and other than those who are here to either support, heckle or both, otherwise known as friends, you're here because you're not as familiar, and I'd like to know if I need to explain anything in more detail or if I've pitched it too low and you're bored. I'd be thrilled to answer questions at the end if you are currently bored. If you don't understand, please let me know. I've aimed for about 35 minutes, but I do have a tendency to gabble, so we may find ourselves running ahead of time, but given I'm all that's standing between you and lunch, I don't think that's going to be a problem for anybody. If nothing else, I hope there's something that you can get out of this. So let's start. Why be open in regards to academic institutions? Well, openness encourages interdisciplinary teamwork. It has the potential to accelerate discoveries. It builds trust in the research ecosystem, builds trust in research findings, and mitigates the reproducibility crisis. It levels the playing field for researchers, institutions, and the public. Also, funding bodies are increasingly requiring open access, whether it's publication of findings or research data. So, a word about nomenclature to start with. Open scholarship is my preferred umbrella term, and that's because it encompasses all open academic activities, including open access publishing, open data, and open educational resources. Like Justin, I struggled when I actually came to write this because there was just too much stuff. So I concatenated it down at someone's kind suggestion to what I said I was going to talk about specifically. It is the broadest term that extends... Oops, something's missing. Oh, never mind. It is the broadest term that extends beyond research output to include teaching, learning, and academic engagement. It emphasises the culture of openness across all scholarly communication practices, and it recognises the role of collaboration within and beyond scholarly communities. I prefer open scholarship to open science because while open science is a perfectly reasonable umbrella term and is in fact used by UNESCO, science is used in its broader sense by UNESCO, but can be interpreted as being STEM-based and excluding the humanities and social sciences, and that creates some tension in an academic environment. Open access typically refers to unrestricted online access to scholarly research outputs, for example, peer-reviewed journal articles or conference proceedings. It's free to read and reuse subject to licensing, and I say that generally speaking because it's a complicated area, and quite often you're asked a question and you say, it depends. Open access is often governed by specific licensing frameworks, for example, Creative Commons. Open research is a broader umbrella term that advocates for transparency in the entire research process, not just the final publication. It encourages the sharing of methodologies, data, coding, and peer review. It promotes collaborative practices to improve the rigour and reproducibility of research. Open research infrastructure refers to the underlying systems, tools, services and frameworks that enable and support open research practices. In other words, it's the scaffolding that makes open science and open scholarship possible. Open research information is metadata. That's an easy one. Open data. Data that is freely available for anyone to use, reuse and distribute, usually with a requirement to cite the source and appropriate licensing. Open data encourages the reproducibility of research results and innovation, but must account for privacy, ethical and legal considerations, particularly around sensitive data. It's often managed during established data repositories that provide persistent identifiers, for example, DOIs. Open educational resources. Freely available teaching, learning and research materials that are either in the public domain or published under licenses like Creative Commons that allow others to retain, reuse, revise, remix and redistribute them. So what is the current state of play? Talking about open access to start with. Academic publishing, though often considered a niche field, generates roughly about $19 billion annually. There are 5 big players in this area and the 5 of them control about half of the market. The biggest one alone boasts profit margins that are on par with Google and Apple, so approaching 40%. These high profits are generally achieved because they avoid the typical publishing expenses. Authors aren't paid for their work, and peer reviewers are often not paid for their work. Production costs have likewise dropped as journals have moved online. Universities and research institutions then pay steep subscription fees for their staff and students to access this journal content, despite the fact that it's the same researchers and students who produce and review the content. Meanwhile, members of the public must pay hefty fees for one-off article access. This is what's known as a paywall. Open access requirements set by many funding bodies create other revenue streams for publishers through article processing charges, which can be exceedingly high. For example, Nature the journal is up around 19,000 Australian dollars an article at the moment. And subscription costs in Australia alone can exceed over $300 million. And a lot of that is taxpayer funded. A lot of it comes down to entrenched norms in academia where career advancement and grant success hinge on publication in prestigious journals. So, how did we find ourselves here? Open access, often abbreviated as OA, and this publishing began to take shape in the late 20th century. And there were 2 primary motivations for this. There was the steep rise in journal subscription costs and an increasing desire among academics to share their work more freely and widely. Libraries around the world, including those at the large research universities, started to notice a pattern. And this pattern was that their subscriptions to the scholarly journals were taking up greater and greater percentage of their allocated funds, but with no offset for that. This continued into the 90s, and journals from certain major publishers were seeing annual subscription price increases in the range of 5 to 10% annually. These costs grew so high that smaller institutions, and even some well-funded ones, had to make hard choices. They could either cut certain journal subscriptions altogether or divert money from other crucial areas such as acquisitions of books, archival materials, and digital resources to keep their most heavily used journals accessible. While this hit the libraries the hardest, it also impacted the academics, teaching and research staff who depend on libraries for journal access. Libraries provide the gateway to new findings, current data and the latest papers in their field via their subscription, and if a library had to cancel the subscription to a key journal, it meant an entire community of academics lost immediate access to that publication. This lack of access in turn slowed down scholarship. Scientists waiting to read critical new research results might be delayed, potentially pushing back the progress of their own studies. In the humanities and social sciences, missing important journals, of which they tend to be fewer, could create noticeable gaps in the ability to gather relevant literature for articles or monographs of their own. At the same time, there were the stirrings of what was going to become what we know as our digital revolution. Researchers began experimenting with ways to share their work electronically through fledglings, preprint repositories, or file sharing servers. By the time the internet properly came along, it had transformed the way information was distributed. The basic principle driving open access is that scholarly findings, which are often produced through publicly funded research, should be freely available to anyone who wants to read them. However, in many cases, only the wealthiest universities could afford comprehensive subscription to the top-tier journals in each discipline. Researchers and students at smaller or less affluent institutions risked being left behind, fueling inequality in the creation and consumption of knowledge. This was particularly fiercely argued in the case of publicly funded research. It should not be locked behind paywalls. By making publications open access, the movement aimed to remove financial barriers. Publishers experimenting with open access models began offering journals or individual articles that were freely available online, shifting the cost burden away from the reader or the library. But in the end, it ended up with the authors. Some introduced alternative funding mechanisms, such as open article processing charges, while others relied on institutional subsidies or membership models. University presses, scholarly societies, and even commercial publishers recognised the potential and started testing pilot programs and new business models to see what could reasonably either replace or sustain the traditional subscription system. Librarians, unsurprisingly, became champions of open access and worked with faculty to launch institutional repositories where researchers could deposit preprints, as in the early version of work, usually before it's gone through peer review, or sometimes post-print, which might have been after peer review or not, depending on the nomenclature chosen by the publishing house. It's one of the reasons why it's such a fascinating and complicated and concerning area at times. These were nicknamed green open access practices, as they came to be called, allowing libraries to provide broader access to scholarship without needing to purchase expensive journal packages. Simultaneously, what became known as gold open access journals, where the final version of the article is openly accessible immediately upon publication, multiplied. Might have had something to do with the amount they thought they could charge. So, where are we now? We have a robust but exceedingly complicated and multifaceted movement encompassing diverse publishing models, licenses and platforms. But even with these advances, debates persist regarding how to best fund open access in a fair and sustainable way. For libraries, the challenge continues. Subscription costs have not disappeared. And the so-called transformative agreements, which bundle reading and publishing rights together, so a library can, the members of a university can actually read the content but also submit without paying an APC, present their own challenges. So if we step it back just a little bit again, how did this happen? Archive is probably the best example of an early preprint repository, and it's still going. It came about in 1991. It's a free, open access repository of preprints and research papers in various fields of science and mathematics, but it started out as a physics repository. It's hosted and maintained by the Cornell University Library. Archive allows researchers to share their work before formal peer review and publication, facilitating dissemination and collaboration. Researchers can upload their work as preprints, which are versions of the manuscripts, as I said, that have not yet undergone peer review. Articles are free to read and download. Authors can also upload revised versions of the manuscript, and all versions are accessible. Submissions are reviewed by moderators to ensure that they meet the basic quality and relevance standards for the specific field. And each submission is assigned a unique identifier for easy referencing. So when Archive started doing this, what it did was open up rapid dissemination of scholarly information and allowed other researchers to see ongoing work in their field and build upon it, open scholarship. As an archive, it acts as a permanent repository for research papers and promotes, via the free access, the principles of open scholarship. Not too little while later came SPARC. The Scholarly Publishing and Academic Resources Coalition, or SPARC, was founded in the US by the Association of Research Libraries. We begin to get a theme here. It emerged as a response to increasing concerns from the academic and research community about the escalating costs of scholarly journals. The goal was to create a coalition of libraries, research institutions, and other organisations to promote competition in the market and provide affordable alternatives. Initially, interestingly, SPARC focused on supporting the creation of low-cost, high-quality scholarly journals as alternatives to commercial publications. And this included partnerships with publishers, actually, Biomed Central and the Public Library of Science, which would go on to form PLOS One. SPARC pivoted and went towards open access advocacy after 2000, promoting the idea that scholarly research, especially publicly funded research, should be available to all, and wanted to support institutional repositories. An early innovation, still in use, was the SPARC author addendum to publishing agreements. And in general, a publishing agreement for a researcher is where they can say, but because of the prestige in publishing in particular journals, traditionally would give up their copyright. So they couldn't then use their own work once they'd actually signed that copyright over to the publisher without actually then being able to reuse it again themselves without asking permission to use their own work. SPARC put together an addendum that's sent by publishers upon acceptance of their work for publication. And by using what the word formulated by SPARC, the authors typically retained their rights, including the ability to use their own work without restrictions, the right to attribution, and the right to self-archive their own work, so stick it in a repository of their choice. The addendum allows publishers to maintain a non-exclusive license right to publish the work for profit while receiving proper attribution as the journal of first publication. So a bit for everybody. Once we hit the 2000s, it gets pretty busy. Building on the success of arXiv, someone wanted to do the same in biomedical research. So PMC, PubMed Central, was officially launched in the US in February 2000, and it's managed by the US National Library of Medicine. There's that theme again. The platform was integrated with PubMed, which is the bibliographic database of the life sciences articles in the US, providing a seamless link between article citations and the full text in PMC. The initial contributions included prominent journals at the time willing to deposit articles for free access. This was followed in 2005 by the public access policy for the National Institute of Health in the US, and that then made it a requirement for NIH-funded research articles to be deposited in PMC within 12 months of publication. So they were basically saying, you're doing publicly funded research, so you can damn well put it somewhere. This policy significantly increased the number of articles in PMC and helped establish it as a leading open access repository, which it still is today. In 2008, the US Congress made the public access policy a legal requirement, mandating that all funded research articles be deposited in PMC. And this marked an important turning point, because a lot suddenly happens in the next couple of years. 2001, 2002, Creative Commons licenses got up and running. And their first home was the Stanford Law School, a university. So we may as well talk about Creative Commons licenses here. Creative Commons licenses are a set of free standardised licenses that enable creators to grant permissions for others to use, share, and build upon their work while retaining some rights. It's those lovely open scholarship principles again. Let's start building out. Creative Commons licenses provide a flexible framework for copyright, allowing creators to specify how their work is to be used and under what conditions. Licenses can be customised to meet the creator's preferences about attribution, commercial use, and modifications. Anyone can apply a Creative Commons license to their work without a fee. So if you want to do that, you are welcome to do so. They are recognised internationally and do not. It's you volunteering what you are happy with the uses for your work. It doesn't mean your work is free for anybody to take, but it says what you are happy in the first instance for someone to do with it. The license and simplify permission, encourage sharing and collaboration, and are compatible with all copyright laws globally. So sometimes I can't get outraged over copyright law because sometimes it does work for us. And the pace keeps picking up. This is a big one. The Budapest Open Access Initiative is widely regarded as a landmark event in the history of open access. It emerged from a meeting organised by the Open Society Institute, and that included scholars, librarians and activists committed to addressing the high costs and restricted access. So the initiative championed two complementary strategies. Self-archiving, as I said, had the sort of nickname of green, encouraging authors to deposit their preprints or postprints in freely available online repositories, enabling greater dissemination. The gold-named journal articles were advocating for the establishment and support of journals that immediately provide open access to their content, but are typically supported by alternative funding models such as publication fees. The Budapest Initiative is very well known for formally introducing the term open access in a global context, and it defines open access as unrestricted online access to peer-reviewed scholarly research, free of financial, legal or technical barriers. It was very swiftly followed by the statement on open access publishing. It was crafted in the US shortly after the Budapest Initiative, and clarified the principles and practicalities of open access, and there are a lot more Bs to come, by the way. Signed by representatives from leading research institutions, the declaration emphasised the importance of removing access barriers, and it called for the benefit of society at large. It wanted authors to retain copyright while granting users a licence to freely access, copy and adapt the work. The aim being to increase collaboration between stakeholders, including universities, libraries, publishers and governments, to create a global infrastructure supporting open access. Also, 2003, we had the Directory of Open Access Journals, and it's a directory that provides free, comprehensive and searchable access to open access journals. It's pretty well trusted, and it's a resource for researchers, libraries and publishers. It promotes open access to scholarly literature. It was originally developed by Lund University Library in Sweden and is now managed by an independent non-profit in the UK. Its mission was to increase the visibility, accessibility and sustainability of open access publishing ecosystem. It indexes journals from various disciplines, ensuring they meet rigorous standards for quality and openness. It contains over 19,000 open access journal titles, covering a range of disciplines, languages and geographic regions. All the content is freely available to read, download and reuse, adhering to open access principles. But inclusion is strict. You have to sign up to particular peer review practices. You have to have transparent editorial process. You have to have open licensing, and you have to be in compliance with ethical publishing standards. It has a multidisciplinary scope, and it provides a very lovely user-friendly interface for searching. The metadata is available via APIs for integration, and it's a critical part of the overall open access infrastructure. It does support following initiatives. What it does is it helps prevent and combat predatory publishing. Now that's where you get, generally speaking, a researcher gets approached and says, oh, we love your work. I lost count of the number of times I've been addressed as professor. Please pay us thousands of dollars and we'll be only too happy to put your work in our journal. Except it doesn't fit any of the criteria and it's vanity or predatory publishing. It helps combat that because it's an assigned directory that gives assurance that the journal that you're dealing with is legit. It's funded through institutional memberships, publisher contributions, grants and donations. So also in 2003, we had the Sherpa project. And it was to support the development of institutional repositories and address barriers to implementation. So they basically actively went, what are we going to do? How can we make it easier for all of our people? The consortium members, University of Nottingham, University College London, University of Edinburgh. And the focus was to help institutions develop repositories and understand the publishers' policies regarding self-archiving. Because what happened was the publishers went, okay, we're going to make it complicated. We don't want standardisation. So you had to follow every single particular rule of each. It was the first of a suite of services and was introduced to provide a database of publisher copyright and self-archiving policies, so you had a one-stop shop. It became a key tool for understanding whether authors could deposit preprints or postprints and where they could put them. The entire suite has provided vital tools for navigating the complexity of open access, copyright and funded compliance, but it became the Open Policy Finder in November last year, and it's brought all of those together. It is building on knowledge as we go forward. So, Open Door is the Directory of Open Access Repositories. So we have the Directory of Open Access Journals. We have the Directory of Open Access Repositories as well. So it's good to know if something that you're looking at is dodgy on that side as well. 2006, as I said, creation of PLOS One. That's the journal that was created as a result of lobbying existing publishers for free and open access to scientific knowledge. But they didn't get any traction, so they went and started one of their own. It was envisaged as an inclusive platform to publish all rigorously conducted research, irrespective of novelty or discipline. It was officially launched in December 2006. It does require payment of an article processing charge. Once again, the UK and the US had pioneers in open access policies. The Wellcome Trust updated its policy in 2021 to align with Plan S, an initiative of promoting immediate open access. That means from 2021, all research outputs funded by the Wellcome Trust, which is a very, very large, for anyone who doesn't know, scientific funder, must be freely made at the time of publication. Authors can't use journals with embargo periods unless the final article is immediately deposited in an open access repository. They are shifting the goalposts, and the funders are having more of a say in regards to, you want the money, then you have to obey our rules. Research must be published under Creative Commons Attribution License, which is pretty much the most generous one you can have, that permits unrestricted sharing, adaptation and use of the work with proper attribution. The Wellcome Trust does, however, provide funding to cover the article processing charge for publishing, and authors are encouraged to publish in Plan S aligned journals or platforms. It applies to all peer-reviewed research articles, book chapters and monographs, so they are restrictive in what they say, and it must also be deposited in Europe PMC. Wellcome Trust as a funder also started to wield a stick. Funding for future ones may be withheld for non-compliance, and researchers may face restrictions on future grant applications if outputs aren't published in accordance with the open access guidelines. The NIH, as I mentioned previously, has been in effect since 2008, and it is just as restrictive. It does have an embargo period though, and others can delay public access for up to a year. Here's another institution of an academic sort doing something interesting. In 2008, Harvard's Faculty of Arts and Sciences became the first in the world to adopt a faculty-mandated open access policy. And what that meant was the researchers, if you want to work in that department, in that faculty, you have to give Harvard a non-exclusive, irrevocable license to distribute the faculty's scholarly articles for non-commercial purposes. And what they did was focus on rights retention. They told the researchers, you have to sign this, and that means that you keep all of the copyright, and all the stuff that you publish goes into the institution repository, and that means that anything that you sign in regards to, the publishers have to be aware that you have this in place, and any relationship with the publisher has to be a non-exclusive license for redistribution. So, authors are able to share their articles freely, archive their work, and avoid traditional barriers like expensive paywalls. Research Councils UK followed a bit later. As of June 2024, the San Francisco Declaration on Research Assessment has been signed by over 25,000 individuals and organisations across 166 countries. This is coming from the problem in a different way. It is saying, okay, how do we change what is important to you in your career rather than publishing in top-tier journals? Let's have a different approach for this. It recommends, if you sign up, that you have a different approach to the stakeholders in the research ecosystem. You have to assess researchers for hiring, promotion and tenure based on diverse evidence of impact and quality, such as teaching, mentoring and community engagement. It's not just about how many times you've published in the best journal in your sphere between this and your last chance for promotion. It emphasises the work and the value of the work itself and how that work is put together rather than its placement in a particular journal. The Leiden Manifesto has similar principles. The principles collectively advocate for transparency, contextualisation and the responsible use of data when evaluating research. Plan S came into effect in 2018 and it was even stronger in regards to requirements. Finally, we joined the party and ARC decided to do likewise in 2013. Once again, publications arising from ARC-funded research must be deposited in an open access institutional repository within 12 months of the date of publication. It aims to ensure results of publicly funded research are accessible by the public and encourages transparency and wider dissemination. Whoops, should I do? Yeah. Here's another B. The Barcelona Declaration was last year, and it's on research, open research information, and one of the key players actually works out of Curtin in Western Australia. It's a collaborative initiative. He did also work at PLOS, transforming the research and information landscape by making openness the default standard. It's been put together by over 25 individuals representing organisations involved in conducting and evaluating research. So it's about making sure all this information is shared and making openness the default. They want to support sustainable infrastructures. So after all that and bringing us up to last year, why would researchers even want to do this if they've been given encouragement to stick with the existing status quo? This is a nice handy graphic that's been around for a long time, and it highlights the advantages of open access. Visibility is a big one. Collaboration's a big one. Access to the public, which you might not otherwise have, is another big one. And why does it matter? Well, pretty much because a former colleague of mine put this together, and it shows just how complicated the open access landscape still is if you want to publish. It's got the green in there, it's got the gold in there, and it's got hybrid. Now that's a subscription journal that you can pay to make it open access, but it's not a purely open access journal. We do also now have what we call diamond open access journals, and that's because you don't have to pay, and it's covered by a different model of payment. All right, I won't go through all of that, but that's an idea that we have to create these kinds of things to communicate with our researchers. So the centrepiece or superhero of any academic institution's open scholarship initiatives is the institutional repository, and yes, I'm biased. I used to work in this area. One of the earliest systems was the e-scholarship repository launched by the, wait for it, University of California. DSpace was developed by MIT and Hewlett-Packard, and ePrints came from the University of Southampton. They came available in 2002, 2003, and provided scalable and customisable solutions for institutions to host, manage, and share their platform outputs. They laid the groundwork for what we now recognise as institutional repositories. But institutional repositories have evolved from simple storage solutions to platforms that integrate with a broader research infrastructure and ecosystem. It's been driven by the open initiatives that I've previously talked about, like the Budapest Open Access Initiative and Plan S. So institutional repositories now support not only articles, but a diverse content like datasets, theses, creative works, and multimedia. They serve as a digital archive for an institution's intellectual output, and that can be fairly impressive. And it's a method by which it can be preserved. Grey literature is also present, so things like some master's theses, for example, that aren't actually submitted, that are not necessarily by research, but maybe coursework. Conference papers, reports. They break down financial and geographical barriers, allowing anyone with an internet connection to access the latest findings. Studies show that open access articles, particularly those you find in repositories, are more likely to be read and cited than those behind paywalls. They help showcase an institution's research strengths to the world. And for me running out of time, I am now running out of time. Okay, these are the two most common ones. ePrints was created in Perl. Please don't boo me, it's not my fault. And DSpace was created in Java. This is one of my favourite stories at the moment, demonstrating the use of institutional repositories, possibly as a result of the attack on the October 2023 cyber attack on the British Library. The Bodleian had to take a number of special digital resources offline. One of these was the British Book Trade Index, which was in high demand from scholars. So they found a solution, they extracted the database and made it available for download via the institutional repository. Less than a month later, an alternative host had downloaded the database, and they licensed it openly, downloaded the database and recreated a resource, hopefully this time on a system with less risk. And this is what it looks like now. The British Library has a shared repository with lots of cultural institutions. And, okay, so we can't have open protocols. We have interconnectedness, though networks, they're promoting the sharing of knowledge. Some of you are probably thinking, I've had a great idea. Why can't we have one repository to rule them all? Well, it's a bit like the XKCD standards. There are lots. It's like asking for a new standard. We do have connecting repositories developed by the Open University in the UK, and it indexes everything. We have CORE, which is an international organisation that helps facilitate open access in repositories. Persistent identifiers are a joy, and there are a lot. ORCIDs are individual ones, and DOIs are for articles or other digital pieces. I have had to skip over. We are doing open educational resources, but I will talk about OpenStax, which is a good place to find some. It's a non-profit initiative based at Rice University, or look, another university, dedicated to improving access to education. And our own Council of Australian University Librarians have the OER Collective, which was started in 2021, and adopts and creates openly licensed educational resources. It encourages universities to pool resources, expertise, and funding to create a shared pool of open educational resources that meets the needs of diverse academic disciplines. And that simply means that they can be updated, they can be used. And if you have any questions, the fabulous Ash Barber is sitting over there, and that's her day job. Okay, so there's also work that we do to try and raise awareness of the cost of ebooks. Okay, so that's another reason for open educational resources. We have an issue because our licenses are different in regards to how we can buy ebooks. Okay, you can go and get one from Kindle or whatever other platform of your choice, but the pricing is different from us, and sometimes they won't actually even sell it to libraries because they want everyone to run out and buy their own copy. Open educational resources, very good idea. We also have open data. So the FAIR principles, which I will talk about, they need to be findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And these have been going for quite a while, developed in the mid-2010s, and emerged from discussions with the greater open science community. And this is what was determined. This is what we need to be able to distribute and find data. So there are these lovely principles. They need to be balanced, however, because they are very ambitious with the CARE principles, which fall under Indigenous, cultural and intellectual property. So what we need to do there is provide a framework for the governance of data to ensure ethical, people-centric and community beneficial arrangements. They were developed and put out by the Global Indigenous Data Alliance and the Research Data Alliance International Indigenous Data Sovereignty Interest Group. And generally speaking, institutions work together with these two lots of principles. So what's come with that? And I'm out of time, but there's some very cool stuff if you want to come and talk to me afterwards. Unpaywall harvest metadata from over 50,000 open access data sources. And it means if you install the plugin, that you can do some really good stuff and actually don't have to go hunting in different repositories to find things. OpenAlex is a free, open and comprehensive index of scholarly works. Serves as a successor to the Microsoft Academic Graph. It aggregates and links data about scholarly papers. Also authors, institutions, journals, and research topics. Where are we? IIIF. If you like images, you will love this protocol. The International Image Interoperability Framework. It's an open standard, and it lets you do all sorts of really cool things with existing systems and digitised cultural works. My favourite is Arthur Evans's Knossos drawings that are held by the Bodleian. You can go in and then zoom into all the details. Octopus and Research Equals are very different. It's about pulling the scholarly pieces apart, so you can register all sorts of different bits, and sometimes they get their own identifiers, and then you pull it all together. It's about separating out from research and then publication. It's about getting credit for all the work you do along the way. Yeah, and I misspoke earlier. I can always get outraged over copyright. And I think my time is up. Thank you.